Hi, folks. This week's episode is going to be a little different. I sat down with Leah Petit, host of the podcast Global Development Interrupted. So this episode is a joint recording between Unsung Americans and Global Development Interrupted. Leah has also created a media platform she uses to share Substack pieces and other reflections that I would highly recommend checking out. I enjoyed recording this because I'm not used to being the one sitting in kind of the, I don't know if it's the hot seat, but I'm not used to being the one answering questions and kind of getting interviewed. I think Leah did a good job kind of prompting a good discussion that way between the two of us. I will say this one is more about, or a fair portion of it involves me sharing my perspective on what's happened to foreign aid and to, I think, what's happened to our country and character in the last year. So, I hope it at least provides some food for thought and discussion. Thank you to Leah for prompting this. If you've ever wanted to hear more of my candid opinions on a variety of things, but particularly what's happened in the past year, stick around. Bye.
Let's go right into, Alex, what is your fun fact?
I'm not that fun. I don't know. This is probably more of like a stupid fact and shows how stupid I was when I was younger. But I had like a heavy metal band in high school, and I loved going to heavy metal and like punk shows and all of that. And like the crummier the venue the place, like the more fun at the time. And I remember that I could spend like several hours in a mosh pit. And I'm old now and I kind of want to go back to doing that. But
I mean, like there's all this awful stuff happening. Like, let's just get into a mosh pit. Let's just let it out.
Please do your fun facts.
My fun fact is that I once untied two men who were hogtied in a hostage situation. And then we all went under a bed to get away from a gun battle that was happening. And when we were under the bed, I realized that he was my coworker that I had come to meet. So we greeted each other as we were hiding from gang members.
I mean, that wins.
Alex, you've had a very long history with USAID. So let's get into you and your background. Where did you grow up?
I was born in Massachusetts and we moved to DC when I was really little. And we moved to DC because my dad started at USAID in 1990 or 1989 when the elder Bush got elected president. So he was running the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, what it was called at the time, and was just like always running around, wherever things were most volatile. He was there when I was growing up. And then he ended up back at USAID from 2001 to 2006 as a USAID administrator. And I grew up around it, and I wasn't sure if I was going to get into it, but I think kind of, I wanted to do the work because I grew up Christian and I thought it mattered that we're trying to figure out how to help solve some of the biggest challenges in the world that were affecting people. People were dying of starvation. And I mean, when you're growing up and your parents saying, there are kids who were starving to death overseas, like eat your dinner. People talk about that. Well, my dad would talk about it at dinner. He'd be like, I just came back from a famine. Like thousands of people are dying of starvation. Like I watched it. So I grew up with all that.
So my question for you though is, it sounds like there are two different pillars here, Christian faith, and then also your dad. And I would think too, being able to see your dad's career trajectory could be a pro, but also a con.
Yeah. My first job was at one of the biggest USA private contractors. And after I got hired, some of the people that had interviewed me said everyone wanted to hire you, but it had to go up to the CEO's office because everyone was worried that it was going to look like we were hiring you because your dad because at the time he had been he had left USAID a year and a half before, but everyone knows who he is in the industry. And is it going to look bad? They were really worried about that. And it was really interesting because I think the assumption people always made is, oh, he got a job here. He got this recognition or whatever because of who his dad is. When I think initially it actually made it more difficult.
It seems like with your career, your dad was helpful, but also a hindrance. But now with the dismantling of USAID, the step back towards global assistance in general, you started using your father's name a bit more. And can you speak to that? And then also how that led into your podcast, which is Unsung Americans?
So one of the things I appreciated and that I'll carry with me the rest of my life is that when this new administration started pulling in some cases, fake projects, 15-year-old projects, largely State Department projects, and saying, look at the abuse and fraud, waste, fraud and abuse. When frankly, while we're talking about it, waste, maybe sometimes there are programs that were wasteful, right? That's I can have a conversation and be like, oh, I don't know if that project ended up, if that was a good idea, maybe that was wasteful. Fraud and abuse are extreme things that simply weren't happening at a mass scale by any means. And I think anyone doing work knew that.
Well, yeah, if USAID is the only agency that's been passing audits and 40% of the staff are lawyers, I don't know about fraud.
Yeah. And but anyhow, when the attack on USAID and these guys are all lying, Congress, Elon Musk, Trump, they're lunatics, are corrupt and all of this, it felt like the only person who was really bringing the fight back to them was my dad. And I watched him doing it. And actually, it's funny. It's not funny, but I remember right when it started happening, I was on the phone with him late one night and was like, do you want to get into a fight here and speak up? And he said, I'm 75 years old. I can't do this the way I used to. I was like, I totally get it. And he called me the next morning early. He's like, all right, I changed my mind. And I think he said once more into the breach. And so where I had spent my career, not deliberately avoiding talking about the fact that my dad was this great leader in the international development world that I worked in, but it was more just, I'm not going to draw attention to it. I grew up in DC. I hated the nepotistic kind of stuff you saw all the time, and neither of us liked it. But it completely flipped and became the opposite when this all started a year ago, because I saw an opportunity to try to add value, right? And some of that was the first week of February, 11th and 12th or so, when there was that House Foreign Relations Committee, the USAID betrayal, where they put up all the bogus, facts about USAID, and I was with him and helping him get ready for that. But sitting there for 4.5 hours and watching this, it was like farcical watching our Congress, right? You had, some very sympathetic and I think some very decent people on the Democratic side. I'm just being honest with what I experienced, but who also were not well coordinated or organized or prepared, right? And this whole thing was blindsiding. But on the right, they just kept all repeating the same nonsense, one after the other. And the number of these people that were just, they're just nasty people. They're just nasty, bad people. I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is the thing, you're okay doing this. And the White House gave them instructions and they followed the instructions. That's about as far from a democracy as you can get. It looks to me, it felt like I would have used the word corruption. They're not representing their constituents. They're lying. They're on C-SPAN, publicly on the record, consistently repeating, and they knew they were lying, right? I think those people were traitors, actually. Apparently, one of the Republicans stopped my dad in the hall when we were on a break and said, we were told by the White House to do this. I refuse. I'm not participating in this. I'm not saying anything. Because they didn't have to either. They could have said nothing. The amount of people, I live in St. Louis, and we have many friends who backed us up and they're like, well, we can't believe this happened. We're against all of it, but we don't really know that much about it. And then you have the people that hate it because they were fed lies about it and they believed it because that was all there was out there. Right. And then the rest of that week, I was coordinating with journalists that wanted to talk to him or trying to use the new network I was building in that space to get him on right-leaning media outlets, because there's people I know that aren't seeing, they don't think there's anything that crazy happening. They're not seeing a lot of it, right? They're just watching Fox News. Fox News is like, ooh, so.
And what were you getting in terms of feedback when you were trying to book your dad on these different media outlets?
I will say I was more often early on when I think people would, a media outlet would see him and they're like, we got to get that guy. That guy's like fire and brimstone, right? But I think this is what I will say that you just made me think of, that I would really love to get out there. Some folks in DC that were helping us, that had, the kind of the PR relationships and all of that, managed to get him on Fox and Friends, on Fox News, like early in the morning. I think it was actually the day of, maybe it was the day of that terrible hearing, or it was that week. They were actually very pleasant with him. They didn't antagonize him in it. And he said, this is what USAID did. Here's some numbers. What they're saying is not true. And, he just went through it. And it was interesting. You could see the guys on the other side. He's like, I'm a conservative Republican. I was a military officer. I'm a war veteran. All those things are true, right? And they're like, oh, I think there was credibility there as a result. And after, when they actually aired it and he saw it, he was livid, because while he was talking, this is Fox News and this is what they do. And this is why I don't, it's very sensationalist. If I see a left-leaning media outlet do this, I get pissed off. I don't like it. But they had him talking and they had all the bogus facts about USAID contradicting what he was, right, like showing that while he's talking. I'm like, how is that? Like this is nonsense. And they know that they're trying to influence the audience.
Well, and they talk about this a lot in terms of just how authoritarian regimes rise, is that they get rid of a common media space, a common space for communication. And it just really pushed you into thinking about, okay, based on the feedback you were getting from some of these news outlets, that you wanted to do something yourself.
Yeah. And I eventually just kept thinking, is there a way for me to use the fact that Andrew is my dad to reach a lot more people, to kind of help get real stories of aid workers? Like, what did we actually do in the field where the work was actually happening? Not what was the bureaucracy and all that, the politics behind it in DC. We always knew we did the work. Like, the real work happened in the ground. It didn't happen in an office in DC or, Vermont or wherever these old organizations were based. I mean, you had to have your infrastructure there, but like the work was on the ground. But it never occurred to me to start a podcast. I don't like being out on the internet like this, to be honest with you. But I had this kind of moment where I realized, I think I was saying earlier, there was a real potential for reach, and I thought potential impact of, let me just get people on to actually tell their stories about what the work looked like on the ground. Let me see if I can kind of help put things help put the stories in understandable terms for more people to just like understand, learn, listen, people who may have been skeptical or just want to know. And that's still the motivation for, bringing guests on and trying to elevate their stories,
Yeah. Very
But
similar.
I was going to say, what made you
Well, honestly,
do a very
it
similar thing?
was when I started Global Development Interrupted, it was really in reaction to, I can't believe what they're saying about these wonderful people that I work with. One of the reasons I loved my jobs working in global development is that I was working with creative, innovative, mission-driven people that were all focused on how do we make the world a better place to live in different capacities. And it wasn't about prestige, it wasn't about profit. I mean, I'm sure there were some people there that were like that, but that's not really the motivating force that I saw when I was working with these individuals. And for them to suddenly become political talking points, as villains, as radicals, as people that are being controlled by outside forces, it was nauseating. It was really upsetting. And so one of the things, though, that I believe in is storytelling has more impact than any policy. I mean, not policy. Policies have impact. But if you spew out data and statistics, you're not going to move somebody versus if you
Right.
share your lived experience.
100%. There's a couple of powerful stories that like really I keep going back to. Ali was a Syrian guest I had on that I like really feel like everyone should listen to this guy's story. It's absolutely wild. He was, coming of age in war-torn Syria, and he said, USAID saved my life. I was literally at an internet cafe, I think it was, or something, like the one place that had internet in the remote village he lived in. And I hate to sort of paraphrase or try to recount this because his version of it's much more powerful, but he found a free USAID course online and took it. His ultimate kind of whole point in this thing he's lived by now, it sounds like, is the American dream is not just for Americans. Like, it's actually the amount of what that means to people around the world is so powerful. We have no idea. And we don't actually, we don't understand that. Some
I agree. This is an underlying theme across the episodes that I have as well, is that the United States was this beacon of hope for so many in different ways. And I think that was also part of our soft power as well, as being looked at as a leader and something to work towards in many of the countries. All right. So what's the major emotion that you get with your different episodes, like across your conversations?
is this is gratefulness, does it count as an emotion? It's interesting with all my kind of anger or cynicism, like I'm resentful of these nasty people that uh, we're just, whatever. When you talk to every single guest at the end of it, I'm like, this person was doing great work. And this is just a great person, like this, not trying to be great either. It was just, they really wanted to have the impact, so I actually have this sense of gratefulness when I think on pretty much after every recording I've done, conversation I've had. What about you?
I mean, personally, for me, after every recording, I am both inspired and sad. Just inspired by the fact that these amazing individuals did work for the US government and did incredible things, and sad that they are no longer doing that. I will say though, and this shifts me into another question that I had, was around like how people are talking about the work in global development, like on your episodes now versus 25. Because what I've started to notice is that there's this shift. Like before, the conversations, I mean, really it was shock. There was a lot of shock and like being attacked and the grief of that and how to handle it and the work and the loss and rebuttals against the attacks that were
Yeah.
happening. And now it's more of an identity where I can speak to migration, I can speak to global health security, I can speak to all of these things. But at the end of the day, the identity that I want my country to be is one of morality, of one that does good for others, that sees the value of the environment, that sees the value of human life, that sees the value of democracy versus this narrow-minded, profit-driven, uneducated, knee-jerk reactions through the world that we're currently seeing.
That's interesting.
And I'm excited by that because I'm like, yes. And also, a lot of the conversations are like, we were an amazing workforce. We did amazing things, and you have unleashed us into the United States. And do you think we're not going to use the tools that we've learned in other countries and bring them back here for the
Right.
US? So I think there's sort of this like positive, you will not define us sort of pushback. I mean, not everywhere. There's still loss, there's still sadness, but I do think that people are starting to put the rug back underneath themselves. It got pulled out and they're putting it back under and like, what am I going to do now? How do I represent my country in a new way?
That makes me feel better, to be honest with you. I was really trying to figure out, like, all right, how do I influence these people that believed all this stuff they were told it's not true? And when I keep saying I've gotten cynical, I think it's that I've realized there's a large group of people in the country that are just bitter, and they've chosen that. They want that. So there's nothing there. There's nothing I can do about that. Yeah. So it's more like I'd rather, I in my mind just sort of debating, how much to pull punches on what I say. I'd rather just be honest. Not that I haven't been honest before, but I've avoided things that I thought might be controversial to people that I'm to an audience I'm trying to convince. So that's what I'm thinking about now. Yeah.
People are less likely to hold back now. I think people want to speak out more. So I'm just going to end with, after hosting Unsung Americans, what do you think America needs to understand right now more than anything around public service and global development?
I think our role, our level of influence in the world was far more significant than even those of us who were very plugged into how entrenched the US was in the rest of the world. I think our influence and impact was far more profound and significant. Sometimes for better or for worse, right? But I think probably net positive, created a tremendous amount of stability and opportunity in the world. And I think the scary and sad thing is that, I mean, this goes beyond even just cutting USAID and, all the other things that the president's doing to alienate Europe and the rest of the world, very deliberately too. We're all going to lose. We're not gaining anything here. America's not gaining, we're losing. So I think that's what people really need to understand and really take a step back and think about and set the politics aside, whatever their voting preference is.
Yeah. I mean, I always say if you're talking to yourself, you're not getting smarter. If you're going alone, you're not gaining much more than what you already have. You're actually in a place of loss. Agreed. Thanks so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, same here.